your first experience with awakening happened as a 16-year-old teenager.
Right.
I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about that.
Well, no, what happened was that I remember, just to go back a little further, I remember being 4 years old and looking up at the stars and thinking, what's going on? So there was very much a questioning mind that was present. And by the time I got to be 11, I found myself arguing about the existence of God with the Sunday school teacher, and I really wasn't buying it. So I came home and I told my mom I wasn't going to Sunday school anymore. I was too busy practicing the violin. And she said, okay, honey. And at 11, I decided that when I saw God, I'd believe it. Okay? So I basically had a kind of empirical perspective. I was interested in experience. And by the time I got to be 16, I was reading a lot of existentialism and really questioning the meaning of life. I think for me, what was coming out, because I was very science-oriented, the question that was really coming to me was there some kind of creative force. I wasn't thinking like God. I wasn't thinking of that, but it was just some creative force like gravity or some other force of nature. And this became like almost an obsession with me. And I had to find out what it was. I don't know why this became so important. And also my life didn't have any meaning. I just could look back, all the way back as far as I could remember, and nothing seemed to connect. And I thought, why am I working so hard? You know, why am I was a concert violinist, I was a straight A student, wanted to go to Stanford Medical School, and I thought, what am I doing this for? So there was a lot of questioning at that time. And what happened was this was about a 4-month period, and I wasn't interacting with anybody or reading anything. It was all kind of an internal process. And I remember the first insight that came, which was, well, of course there's some creative force. There's all this stuff, right? There's trees and people and plants and animals. And I thought, well, obviously there's some kind of creative force. And again, I was 16, right? And I thought, well, I have to discover what this is. I became convinced that I could, and I guess for quite a period of time, this was sort of churning in me. And the next thing that came to me was the realization, well, of course I can discover what it is because I'm part of it. So for some reason or other, I have no idea how or why, I came up with this idea that I was going to, when my parents went to bed one night, I was going to sit down. I had a big beanbag chair, a big furry beanbag chair. And I was going to sit in that chair, and I was going to stare at the wall, and I wasn't going to move until I discovered it. And I didn't know anything about meditation. The only thing I knew a little bit about, because I'd done some acting, was I knew about breathing. And so I took off all my clothes, and I sat down in the beanbag, and I stared at a point on the wall, and I wasn't going to move until I discovered it. I know. And
long night?
Yeah, it was. Well, what happened was that, my mind started wandering. I thought, nope, not going to let it wander, and I pulled it back. And I noticed that I wanted to itch, and I wouldn't let myself itch. And I was basically, I guess you could say, doing very focused meditation, didn't know what I was doing. So after a while, I noticed something really far out happening, which was that there was a kind of movement in the wall, a kind of almost like a breathing, undulating kind of thing. And not only that, but it was radiating light. And not only that, I could feel it. And some part of me went, wow, this is, cool. And I thought, I'm just going to go with this. And I just intuitively knew how to allow whatever this was happening to continue. And the light got brighter, the movements got bigger, the intensity of the feeling increased. It got stronger and stronger and stronger until eventually it got to the point where it was terrifying. I literally felt like I was in a sports car driving with the gas pedal nailed to the floor. It was going faster and faster, and I was going to go off a cliff. And I knew I was going to go off a cliff. And I became absolutely terrified. And at that point, a voice just came to me which said, just stay with your breathing. Okay. And that was the only thing that somehow I could be with. And there was like an explosion. And there was no more room. There was no more me. There was just what I described then as like the sun. And I don't know how long consciousness was in that awareness. It was, the way I described it back then was like 1,000,000 times orgasm. As if every atom in my body had exploded or something. And then awareness came back, and at that point, the whole room was like imploding into me and exploding out of me. It was like I was being ripped apart. And I started shaking, whole body just shaking and crying. And I got up to get a blanket to cover myself, and I looked at the clock, and I'd been there for about 3 hours. And at that moment, and to this day, everything had meaning, actually. There was a sense of everything connected, from my past all the way to the present, and there was a sense of trajectory into the future and of being guided. And that has always been the case. And also the sense of seeing and feeling the light also became available to me then. And it wasn't until, as I was mentioning to you earlier, it wasn't until I met Jean Klein that I realized what had happened to me.
So you now, in addition to your teaching, as I said before, are a counselor and a healer. I'd like to hear a little bit from you about how you work with clients.
Well, yeah. I've been in practice for about 30 years, and I started out in Alexander technique, which was movement work. I worked a lot in the performing arts, and I liked that work. I learned that work when I came out of the monastery, and it would really appeal to me because it was. I think Alexander himself really was tuned in deeply. In fact, Jean Klein was very, very excited about the fact that I was doing Alexander work because Alexander really understood energy. Even though he didn't use those words, he had no Eastern influence at all, but he was clearly tapping into it. So I was interested in working with people where I could continue my spiritual practice in the context of supporting people. So I always had a gift with my hands and had a natural healing ability. So I learned that work and went into practice in '81. But what happened was people started having more happening to them. Emotional, like healing would happen, or energetic changes in their body, and because I was opening energetically, I began to see the connection between all of this stuff. And so I began to find out how to work with people using these different modalities. I mean, with the hands-on work initially, Alexander and cranial sacral and zero balancing work, which is osteopathic energy work, and osteopathic and energy work. And then other work that dealt with emotional healing, like self-acceptance healing, and other areas that really were not so cognitively based, but more experiential, physically based. And I began to see that there was a direct connection between those processes that help release the energy and the expansion into awareness. So my work evolved over the years, and at this point now, mostly I see people like I do publicly in satsang, where just privately supporting people in their process. So I would say I'm a guide or a coach and a mirror for them to really see who they truly are and to find out how to explore their own inexperience and let that guide them into, whether it's emotional healing or even psychological healing, maybe, and even expanding into awareness. I'd say most of the people that come are really have been on a pretty long, sincere path, usually, and it really helps to have that mirror, that intensity of clarity. Right.
So it's interesting. We're going to come back a little bit later about this whole thing about energetic healing and your ability to affect things that are going on apparently at a distance. I think it's very interesting and something I'm exploring as well. So let's talk more basically about something I see throughout all of your work, and that's resisting what is. What is the relationship between awakened conscience and resistance?
Well, I mean, I like to say that mostly what I'm doing with people is just showing them how to get out of the way.
Right.
And how we're in the way is, if you want to call that resistance, is really unconscious. It's habitual, identity functioning. And so if somebody awakens, if they begin to discover their true nature, which many, many people today are all over the place, then it's like, now what? How do I deal with now what's happening, what's coming up? Okay.
Absolutely.
And what they usually find is all of a sudden, it's like I say, if you want to clean your house, and you have a big house, and you decide you want to do it at midnight with all the lights off, and you just use a candle. Yeah, you're going to do an okay job of cleaning, right? But if you put on floodlights and, middle of the day, you're going to see all kinds of stuff you didn't see before. So when you awaken, there's like more energy, more light, and all of a sudden you see more that you didn't see before. You think, oh, gee, I'm in this awakening thing. Now there are all of these problems I didn't know, all this stuff is moving. Like when people come on retreats, they sign waivers, And I say, well, the reason we have you sign those is because if you get enlightened, you can't blame us.
That's great.
You know, it's like people don't know what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah.
But there's no choice about it. I mean, I think it's so. I mean, I think resistance is just. I mean, I think it's part of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in terms of what we call transformation, what we might call transformation, or being liberated, I think it's that if we bring awareness to where there is resistance, we begin to recognize that which we take ourselves to be, which is the identity, which is basically,
a herring.
that which has the beliefs and the constructs and is the source of suffering.
Mm-hmm.